Welcome back. Hope you had a lovely lunch break, managed to get outside and get some sunshine and look after your well-being, which leads me very neatly into our next panel discussion. We are going to hear from our zero carbon panellists. Remember, we heard from Jo Gilroy just before lunch, and wasn't she amazing? So inspirational. So we're going to be coming to that shortly. But first, we are going to talk about well-being, because this is a topic on everyone's minds, particularly post-pandemic. So what does it mean? I mean, we sort of all know roughly what it means, but what does it mean in a business sense, in a corporate sense, and how can companies do better at this? Now, don't forget, before we start, you can send in your questions, and this is a topic that we really do want to hear from you about, because obviously the best person to judge their well-being and how to achieve that is themselves. So tell us whether you feel that your well-being needs are being met and how you think they could be better met, or the things that you like to do, or how you think that well-being can be incorporated into the corporate structure more effectively. You're watching via Slido. I'm sure you all know this by now, but I'm going to repeat it again for those of you who weren't watching this morning. To the right-hand side of the screen, there's a box saying, type your question. So it's really easy. Just put the question in there. That comes through to us. Megan's going through all the questions on her laptop, and she's going to tell us some of the things that you've been asking, and comments as well. Just talk to us. We want to hear from you. So let me introduce the guests now. We have, to my left here, Robert Cheeseman. Hello, Robert.
Hi.
Robert is the head of health here, aren't you?
Yes.
Daisy Hughes. Hello, Daisy.
Hi.
Customs and Communications Officer. And on the Zoom link, as if by magic, there they are. Hello. Hello, hello. We've got Sarah Meek, who's the Managing Director of Mates in Mind, on the left here. Hello, Sarah. And hello, and Emma Harvey, who's the Group Sustainability Manager for Gammon Construction. You're joining us from Hong Kong.
I am indeed. Hi.
What time is it there?
Just coming up to 8 o'clock. Yes, 8 o'clock in the
8
evening.
o'clock in the evening. Goodness me, so you've had your whole day. Well, thank you so much for joining us all that way away. It's fantastic to have you. Thank you. So let's start off. We're going to start off with Rob. You're head of health. What is well-being? Sum it up for us.
Sum it up, easy as that. I mean, there's literally a million different places you could start with well-being. I suppose one way to look at it is it's a partnership. You know, what we have to understand is that work is one of the biggest influence on someone's well-being, judging, you know, by the amount of time we spend at work and the people we interact with at work. So there is that responsibility on the companies, which we'll come on to in a second, to actually provide solutions, support in there, and also from the individual's perspective, to, you know, in that striving to bring the best version of yourself to work, in actual fact looking after ourselves, looking at how we invest in our own well-being. And I think if we take the Balfour Beatty Wellbeing Strategy as an example, there's literally now a position where it's touching on every part of the business. You know, so it's whether the data we talk later about the social value piece, you know, it's in our bid work, it's in the way we interact on everything we do. And I think when we talk about the strategy, there's lots of KPIs in the strategy, measurements of how we're succeeding in that. But when we talk about it, one of the quite nice things to talk about is the fact that the strategy starts with every single individual person. And because ultimately it's the way that you interact on a daily basis with people that has a big influence on, literally, I like to call it your calling card. You know, after every single interaction, what have you left as a mark of yourself on that person you've interacted with? Is it a positive experience for them? And then coupled with that, you have the more corporate side of things, which ties in the leadership model and stuff like that into exactly how the business wants to represent itself in that wellbeing space.
And in terms of productivity, I mean, they know, don't they? They've done lots of psychological studies on this. They know that people are much more productive if they feel valued, if they feel heard, if they're not getting bullied and shouted down. So presumably that feeds into the strategy
100%, yes, yeah. And it's about feeling, you know, it's creating an open culture where people feel able to speak up, able to talk openly, feel respected, feel valued, and feel challenged in the workplace as well. And that...
As in personally challenged?
Personally challenged within their role, you know,
yeah.
Actually just to sort of challenge, because obviously otherwise you have the sort of stagnated approach to stuff, which is not beneficial either, you know, for people, either for the work or for individuals. So it's about that sort of environment, being able to have those conversations when perhaps things aren't great, you know, but also having that constant conversation when perhaps things are going okay, but we're still talking about well-being. It's whether it's in, you know, reviews with managers constantly on a day-to-day basis. How are things going? How are you? Those simple questions that people like to talk about. How are you? But actually meaning it.
Yeah.
How are you? How are things? You
Yeah.
know? And having the courage to speak out and knowing that there's, on a business level as well, there's lots of support in place when things perhaps aren't going right. But equally, can we keep people in the space where in actual fact things are good? You know, can we support people to make positive changes in their life outside of work as well as inside of work?
Yeah, I've got a really great boss at the moment, and he really listens to you, you know, and you feel like he really cares. You know, he asks you questions, how are you, and you feel like he really cares. It's a relatively small change for bosses to make, I feel, but it makes a huge difference to people who work for them, doesn't it?
Yes,
it's a
massive.
game changer.
Absolutely massive, yeah. And by having that, as you described, a good boss, you would automatically have the confidence, perhaps if you did have a challenge or something, to go and have that conversation, you know, and having that environment across a company the size of Balfour Beatty's is a real big challenge. But like I say, it takes place, you know, it's driven by the leadership around the organisation to drive, you know, behaviour change and support of behaviour change, and also on a more team level, you know, the people within a team to actually say, actually, I will be the manager that does step up and listen. I'll be the manager that does interact well with my team, you know, and then those individuals within that team, when they go on to become managers, do the same sort of thing, and the positive experience carries on the right way through the organisation.
They pay it forward, and it does filter down from the top, as you say.
Yes.
And looking externally now as well, because obviously Balfour Beatty works with lots of different external partners and within lots and lots of different communities. You mentioned this word social value. Daisy, this is your department, isn't it?
Yeah,
Tell us a bit more.
So definitely, so investing in social value and delivering social value, getting out and about in the communities. It's one of my key elements of my role, and it's something I'm really passionate about. I love the fact that I get to go out and sort of meet new people, meet new organisations, and I think it goes without saying, you know, like we've discussed, when you do what you love and when you're meeting new people, building positive connections, you know, that automatically improves your well-being when you feel like you're valued and you feel like you're coming to work at a great place. But I think more wider than just me, social value and delivering social value in the community, it can really help build team relationships. And we've really seen this, and not just team relationships within your project, but also across your supply chain, across our client, national highways, and across our competitors as well. I think we're starting to realise that, you know, social value can make such a meaningful impact in the places that we work, and when you work together, you can really sort of make an impact. And I think a really good example of this is on the A57 Link Road scheme, which is the project I work for currently. So we organised a really great, it was a fundraising event for Manchester City and the community, so it was called the Blue Run. Basically, you can imagine, so you're running around, you did 5K and you got covered in paint. And we did this in collaboration with National Highways North West Regional Investment Programme. So it was with other schemes, with other organisations, with other businesses. And this was really great to build that sort of team connection. We had some people that made fantastic effort dressed as Smurfs. And we ended up raising £1,200 on the day, and obviously that was really recognised by the charity, but also the effort that we went into was really recognised as well and built great connection with the organisation. But obviously as a team you talk about this and you discuss this and you talk about it and have a laugh about it in the future, and I think it's such a positive thing that we do as a business, and it should be really sort of entwined with well-being. You know, for me, well-being and sort of being included, being as part of one team is all sort of links together.
Yeah, it's a good team building exercise.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. And let's just turn now to Emma Harvey, who's all the way over in Hong Kong. Emma, I hope you can hear us okay. I'd like to ask you about the Well Building certification. Can you tell us a bit more about that and what it was used for?
Yeah, sure. The Well Building certification is a little like a green building certification, like BREEAM, and that focuses on human health. So it's about creating a space. We used it for our new office when we relocated, and it has various different categories. It looks at mind and nourishment, as well as the obvious ones about, you know, air quality, water, light, all of these kinds of things. So it's a scheme that tends to dovetail with the American green buildings standard, which is LEED. It's performance based, which is quite unusual for some of these schemes. So they'll actually send an assessor to your your office and test that your air quality is okay and test that your water quality is okay. Um, and yeah, that's about it, really.
And is it about creating an attractive environment for people to work in as much as possible? I notice you've got some lovely green plants behind you. That's the kind of thing that people like to have around them, isn't it? And it's those small differences: natural daylight, big windows, comfortable temperature. All these things make people feel better and feel like we spend so much time at work. Should it really be a struggle every day?
Yeah, absolutely. And we certainly did it not only for sort of improving people's well-being, but also showing that we do value our staff. We were moving office from a very well-established location that had good connectivity, a good neighborhood buzz, lots of places to eat, and we were moving to quite an industrial area that was sort of just starting to transition and change. And so we thought it was also good for the morale of the staff as well, to show that they were valued, and to have things like the elements that you mentioned, the biophilia, the green spaces, the wood elements, things like this, to create a good place to work and enjoy.
And do you get positive feedback from employees who are working in these kinds of environments?
For sure. I think it is a little prescriptive. So your designer is also key in the design of these kinds of spaces. But it really gives you a good framework to follow, to make sure you're hitting all the buttons, as it were, in terms of creating quiet spaces, creating spaces for engagement, making sure that there's in a meeting room it's incredibly quiet and there's no disturbance from outside. Yeah, we've had very good feedback from staff. They can go and see what their air quality is like on monitors around the building. We test the water quality regularly. So I think, yeah, overall people were very pleased with it.
Indeed. Well, Sarah Meek is the Managing Director, just to remind you, of Mates in Mind. Let's turn to her now. Sarah, just tell us a bit about what Mates in Mind is and why it's relevant to the construction industry.
Okay, so Mates in Mind was set up 5 years ago. We're a registered charity and we focus around mental health within construction. We came about because of there was a report that came out showing that unfortunately 2 construction workers are taking their own life every day, and that there is a higher incidence of mental health challenges within the construction industry, particularly as we start heading down towards the sort of the trades themselves and the smaller organisations. So we're a charity and we work very much with organisations across construction, regardless of their size, to look at the mental health within their workforces and within their workplaces, and see what we can do to create a really preventative, proactive approach to mental health, rather than always waiting for that crisis point to happen. We're very much around that prevention piece.
Now that is a shocking statistic. What can be done to sort of mitigate that risk for construction workers?
So Balfour Beatty have absolutely, we've been working with them for a very long time, and it's embracing that cultural change piece. As Rob said, it needs to come from the leadership, but it also needs to match those boots on the ground as well. And it's around equipping people with knowing how to have those conversations. Very often we won't ask a question because we're worried about what the response might be. We're worried about, do we have the solution if someone opens up to us? But for us, and working in partnership with the organisations, it's around just spotting those signs, having the confidence to have those conversations, whether you're a line manager, whether you just noticed something in a colleague, and then having, supporting somebody through that and signposting to the right places. And it's very much just, changing that culture, creating that positive workplace, and working with the organisation around, they might have an employee assistance programme, and they might have local initiatives in place, but just making sure that everybody feels included, and knowing what to do and where to go.
And tell us, Sarah, how do you spot the signs of somebody who may be struggling with mental illness at work or difficulties?
Yeah, I mean, as was said earlier, a little bit of stretch and a little bit of, challenge in your job keeps you fresh and keeps you thinking that motivated. But what you might start to notice in yourself or perhaps others is things like low energy. So they've gone from being quite energized to perhaps having a lower energy, procrastinating, taking longer to complete tasks. They may become very withdrawn or irritable. And then we start seeing the signs of it starting to impact on sleep patterns. So disturbed sleep, unable to sleep, can't switch off, going out for a walk, but actually never stopping talking about work. We might see reduced performance, and very often that's where HR might get involved, because there's been a noticeable change in someone's work performance. And increases in anxiety, really starting to, perhaps overthink things, which is sort of really starting to manifest at this point. Exhaustion, somebody might, phone in sick and say that they're perhaps off with a different reason. But what we really hope is that, working with the organisation, that they feel comfortable to say if they're struggling. They feel comfortable to say if they've got anxiety and, that they're finding it difficult today. So, yeah, it's different for everybody, and that's a huge, range of presentations. But if you have noticed a change in somebody that you know well or you work with very closely, ask them, but ask them twice. How are you? How are you really? What's going on? And very often that can be the catalyst to actually someone having a wider conversation with you.
And Robert, let's just bring you back in on this, because if there are people watching now who are thinking, actually, I'm really not feeling great, or I've noticed one of my colleagues isn't too good, what can they do? Where do they go? Who do they talk to?
So, I mean, we're lucky in the sense we have quite a lot of support. What we'd always encourage, if possible, is to speak to someone. And that could be the line manager, depending on the relationship. It could be a colleague, it could be a peer, because a lot of people report, the NHS did a study a while back saying that 86% of people found their best support to be their peers. So actually reach out and just make that connection with somebody. Now, we also have mental health first aiders in the business, which they can approach anonymously.
And is that a phone number? Is it an email?
So each site, it works slightly different for each, but each site will have perhaps, depending on the site, 3, 4, 5 mental health first aiders that are displayed on boards. The numbers are on a central website that they could contact someone away from their area if they wanted to, and just reach out. And they provide, act as a conduit to get them the support they need. So the mental health first aider would support the person to perhaps contact our CIC, our Employee Assistance Programme. So the Employee Assistance Programme is provided for all staff, and it's basically, there is online support, there's tech support, there's counselling available, there is online references, online quizzes you can take, all things like that to help you try and get the right support you need. And then what we would do is they can self-refer to that. They would try and encourage the mental health first aider, would try and encourage them to practice to make the call and say, look, I'm struggling, I need a little bit of help, I'm not quite sure where to turn, and just open up that conversation.
And with those shocking suicide statistics for the construction industry, is it that they're trying to get the message across that there's no shame in asking for help, there's no shame in having a mental health issue? All of us have something at some point, don't we? Yeah. And it's just saying, come forward, reach out, it's okay. Yes,
100%. You've all seen the signs, it's okay not to be okay, and it's just getting that message across, because inherently within construction, yes, it's a male-dominated workforce. There's been less inclined to reach out, but that's where the organisation comes in as well.
Is it improving, do you think?
I think, yes, I really do believe it is. Yeah,
it's a lot more awareness now, which helps, doesn't it?
A lot more, and and for every person that does step up and speak out and get support, because a lot of people will never hear about, because it's a personal thing, so you'll never find out. But the ones you do hear the stories about that were well supported only go to drive that narrative that it is okay, and I think for every single person that does reach up and speak out, it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And I think, the more things we have in place to support them doing it, and the more people that then subsequently say, oh, I used the CIC, I did use that.
Even just the act of telling somebody can be a massive weight off the shoulders, can't it? Just telling someone.
Just sharing that problem or that challenge, whatever it might be. People won't always have the answers. You know, they don't need to have the answers. You just need to have someone to speak to. And,
Yeah.
and once you shine a light on that problem, very often it reduces the impact of it. You think, okay, now I've voiced it, I feel like I know where I could go with this.
Yeah. Now tell us, Robert, we're going to do a poll now. Poll time, love a poll. So if you think about a typical week, how many things do you do to invest in your well-being? So give us some examples. I said before we went on air, is it a bubble bath with some candles?
Yes.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But it could be getting outside, walking the dog. What is it? Watching a TV show? What is it? Chatting to a friend?
It's something I would describe as restorative or investing in yourself. So it could be water, it could be sleep, it could be nutrition, it could be exercise, it could be meditation, it could be colouring book, you know, it could be spending time with family, children, friends, colleagues, you know, and dare I say, it could even be, you know, having that glass of wine of an evening, you know, while
Now you're
having
talking.
that little moment to relax
That'll be
and
my
pay
piece
back.
of well-being
you know.
later.
Yes, there are lots must emphasise the moderation side of things, but whatever, you know, to relax and to wind down and actually, you know, give yourself something back.
And it's something for you, isn't it? Because I know, you know, a lot of people have children as well.
Yes,
So, you know, you're
yeah.
working hard and then you're going home and there's a lot to do at home as well for mums and dads. But it's taking that time for you, isn't it?
Yes,
And saying,
yeah.
I'm not going to feel guilty about the fact that I'm going to go and read my book in the garden for half an hour or whatever it is you want to do.
No, and I think that's optimal essential for optimising well-being is having that non-negotiable agreement with yourself that these things I'm going to do.
Yes.
You know,
It's
every
almost
day,
like factoring them into your week,
this is
isn't
gonna
it?
be-
Like
yeah.
the gym or, you know,
completely,
whatever
yeah,
it is. that-
sleep, water, just say, right, this is part of my life and
Yes.
this is what I will do every day.
And
It's
a non-
non-negotiable.
A non-negotiable, that's a good word to use. So the options are, I'm sure you've all seen them on the screen, but it's how many things do you do to invest in your well-being each week? 0, hope it's not 0, forget any zeros, I'm going to cry. 1 to 2, 3 to 4, or 5 or more. So we want to be aiming for 5 or more, I think, don't we? And we're going to hear the results now from Megan. Do we need a drum roll?
Thankfully, no zeros
Oh,
so
good.
far, which is good news. Yeah, but it's quite an equal spread between the answers. But the majority of people said they do about 1 to 2 things a week to positively impact their well-being. So it's quite an equal spread between the other two. But that's
So 1 to 2, and what was the other one?
1 to 2 positive things a week. Sorry, it's just loading up for me now. For some reason, the technology has given up, and then it was pretty much an equal split then between 3 to 4
3 to
and
4.
5 or more.
And 5 or more. So okay. So the people who are only doing 1 to 2 things a week need to work on that. Not to put any pressure on you, because that's not going to help your well-being. But I think we could do better than once a week, couldn't we, Robert?
Yeah, and I think possibly it's how people define it. Possibly people are thinking of going out
I
for a
agree,
run
yeah.
or I've got to do an hour's exercise. And actually, in fact, something like water that I mentioned, actually saying, do you know what? Having a litre of water a day, whatever it might be, whatever the point is actually an investment in yourself. So that I
Yes.
can include that. And by including that, you almost feel better. You think, actually, I'm doing something. I was
Yes.
doing that anyway. Oh, now I can actually say that I am doing it.
So it could be as simple as drinking or eating 5 a day or
Yes,
something.
things like that. Think
Where
of
you're
it.
just looking after yourself, body and mind, because
Yes.
they're so connected, aren't they? Have we got some questions, Megan? Let's
We
have
have
them.
one question here that asks, what can Balfour Beatty do more of to show that we're invested in people's well-being? What should line managers be promoting within their teams?
Right, Robert, is that one for you?
I don't know, maybe. I would like to think we're already doing a lot. I think there is obviously going to be differences between businesses and teams and stuff like that. But I think one of the biggest things you probably have to go to is that conversation piece. You know, line managers, I would encourage, you've got to be in, and I know there's demands across the business for time and stuff like that, but having that regular contact with your team, because as Sarah spoke about earlier, looking at those changes in people, the better you know somebody, the easier it is to identify when that person is perhaps, you know, we won't use the word normal because there's no such thing, but when they're perhaps acting, you know, slightly different to what you may be normal to. So I think it would be, the conversations would be the first piece. Close contact and conversations with your team and with your peers. And if you can't do it, then, you know, cultivate it within the team. You know, perhaps you have a little wellbeing ambassador within the team or something like that, and when you get together as a team, you talk about it. You know, so all the one-to-ones or team meetings that I do, the first thing is, how's you? Outside of work, let's talk about outside of work, and then we'll talk about inside of work and challenges and stuff like that, and just create that culture where, you know, you feel confident that people are going to speak up if they need to.
And Sarah, just returning to you, do you offer kind of training about this kind of thing for managers? Because really the onus does seem to be on the managers to trickle it down to everybody beneath them.
Absolutely do. It's part of, within Balfour, it's part of the supervisor development pathway to identify, potential issues within gangs. And start the conversation, which is one that's open to a wider workforce. With Balfour have trained over 10,000 employees in that. So, there is a huge commitment to doing that. And it's already started to have an impact. I am aware of one particular team winning the Safer Highways Award because of that awareness of mental health. They'd spotted something that was going on, not related to their particular team, but a member of the public, and then they intervened. And that actually, resulted in an award for the team. So there is a wider societal impact on this as well, to also spot the signs and have those conversations at home with your friendship groups, and actually, making sure that we're all just checking in with everybody, on a regular basis, because there are a lot of pressures out there at the moment, and we've seen that there's potentially some coping mechanisms there around increase in alcohol or prescription drug use, and just keep aware, keep in touch with people, and know where to go and what to do if you do notice any differences.
And on that lovely note, Sarah Meek, thank you very much for joining us, Managing Director of Mates in Mind. Also, Emma Harvey, Group Sustainability Manager from Gammon Construction. Thank you for joining us all the way from Hong Kong. We really appreciate it. You can go and start your wellbeing evening now. And Daisy Hughes, thank you so much, Daisy. And Robert Cheeseman, Head of Health, thank you as well. And thank you for sending in your comments and taking part in the poll. I've really enjoyed this. I feel like I've had a bit of well-being. Just talking about it, though, it does just make you feel, it's just spread the kindness, spread the positive vibes. Right, now we have another film for you, a film about delivering the A14 ahead of schedule.
The A14 Cambridge to Huntingdon Improvement Scheme was Highways England's flagship project as part of Roads Investment Strategy Phase 1, a £1.5 billion investment. The scheme ran for 21 miles east-west and of course links the ports on the east side of England through to the A1, the M1 and the M6. The existing road has about 85,000 vehicles every day, and 26% of that is heavy goods vehicles. The A14 scheme also included 5 miles of new roads, local roads for the local community, 24 miles of non-motorised user, so routes for pedestrians, cyclists and equestrians. And we've managed now through the construction that we've carried out to improve journey times by 20 minutes over that 21-mile stretch. So the A14 fully opened to traffic on the 5th of May 2020, which was 8 months ahead of the public committed date of the end of December 2020. So it was quite a remarkable achievement that we managed to do that in that time frame. We had 10 million cubic metres of bulk earthworks that we had to carry out as part of the scheme, and we came up with a strategy to extract materials from borrow pits along the route of the scheme. So we were very resourceful, and of course this generated a sustainable solution because we were local to the scheme. It significantly reduced the haulage of the materials that otherwise would have come from many miles away. So as part of the scheme we had to remove a number of trees, but we had a strategy to replace them 2 for 1. We had nearly 900,000 trees that we planted as part of the scheme, and in fact the scheme was biodiversity net positive as a result of the actions that we took. The A14 was seen as an exemplar project. There were a number of areas where we could demonstrate through the collaboration of the team. We were upholding the thinking behind Project 13 to deliver better outcomes. And this was also supported by the government with their accelerator programme, and certainly at the end of 2020, Grant Shapps visited and promoted the accelerator and used the A14 as an example of good practice to take this forward. Part of the legacy from the scheme, we were very keen to introduce new people into the industry, and we're very proud that we had over 175 apprentices that came onto the scheme and over 75 work experience placements that we carried out during the project. The A14 has been very successful. We've won over 35 awards during the time that we've been on the project. including the Digital Transformation Project of the Year, the Productivity Project of the Year and the Partnership Project of the Year as part of the British Construction Industry Awards in 2019. So at the end of the A14 we're collecting together all of our lessons learned, and we're really looking to spread those within Balfour Beatty and within the wider industry.
Hello. So hopefully you remember that before lunch we heard from Jo Gilroy. She was telling us about net zero carbon and what we need to do as an industry to play a part in the race against climate change. Well, we're welcoming back Jo now. Welcome back. Hope you had a nice lunch. And also we've got 4 other panellists. This is a very big discussion joining us. So let's introduce everybody. Dr. Ian Wilkinson, thank you for joining us. You are the head of UK Energy Transition Technology at Siemens Energy. That's right. Correct. Working in collaboration with GeoPura to bring to market and commercialise affordable hydrogen and zero-emission fuel-based technologies. That's a mouthful, isn't it? Perhaps you can distill it down for us into, tell us a bit more about what you do and so on. We'll come to you in a moment. Sure. Let's move on though to Stephen Elderkin, Director of Environmental Sustainability for National Highways. Thank you for joining us. Nikki Richardson, hello Nikki, Commercial and Development Manager for Major Projects in Aggregate Industries. Thank you for joining us. And finally, Nick Rothwell, you are Sustainability Consultant for Atkins, the design firm. Thank you so much for joining us. So let's start with you, Jo, as you're next to me. Now, you gave us a fascinating presentation earlier, lots of slightly kind of eye-opening moments, I thought, and got us all quite fired up. Just give us your assessment of how far the highways business is in its journey to achieving net zero. Are we a long way off, a bit closer than we were?
Oh, definitely closer than we were, but you know, any organisation, regardless of sector, that stepped forward today and said we're at least halfway through, if not nearly at the end, I would really challenge that. I think the majority of organisations, we are all in the same spot, which is we're relatively at the beginning because our knowledge of climate science is evolving at such a pace. You know, we talk about the different scopes of carbon today, and we refer to 3, scopes 1, 2 and 3. But, you know, there's conversations happening already about historical carbon emissions. Do we capture that as scope 4? Is there going to be a scope 5? So, you know, we're really evolving in our understanding. So we are like everybody at the beginning, but where I feel that the highways business and the wider Balfour family as well, you know, are leading the way is in their attitude to it. You know, because I said before, we cannot do, the days have thankfully gone that we had to sort of beg, borrow and steal to get sustainability initiatives off the ground. You know, this company has really leaned forward and put some serious skin in the game, some serious resource into ensuring that we are able to move the net zero agenda forward in the right way and have those frank and honest conversations with our clients.
I mean, the fact that we're sitting here having this discussion with all these guests, exactly. You know, it's clearly being taken very seriously.
Absolutely, and I mean, you know, we heard from Andy Omerod earlier as well. You know, I had a real pleasure of going and spending time with our plant and fleet team up in Derby, and it is absolutely astonishing what they're working on, especially the partnerships that they're forming to really trial, can we make hydrogen technology viable? Can it be the next leapfrog stage for ensuring that our plant equipment and our heavy vehicles are as sustainable as possible and are actually part of the solution towards net zero rather than at the moment being a bit of a sticking point?
So talking of hydrogen solutions, that moves us neatly on to Dr. Wilkinson, because that's your department, isn't it? Just tell us a bit more about the work that you're doing.
Yeah, so what hydrogen allows you to do is decarbonise the big stuff too. So you were talking before the break about the heavy plant equipment and the welfare cabins, the more power-hungry demands that you have on a construction site. At the moment, very reliant on diesel generators and diesel fuel. Still, and what fossil fuels do really well is pack in an awful lot of energy into a small volume. And if you want to take the carbon emissions out of that energy cycle, then you need a way of delivering that power in a well-packaged way, and again in a small volume. Again, you've got the challenge of, you've got the example of the electric digger here.
The digger behind us.
And the thing with batteries is that their energy density is much lower, so you can't get as much energy in the same volume. And that's really why you were talking about needing several to go away and charge them up and bring them back. Exactly. What hydrogen allows you to do is pack more energy into a smaller volume so that your digger can run for longer. And what we've done with Siemens Energy in partnership with GeoPure is develop a hydrogen power unit. So this is a 20-foot container, and essentially you feed it hydrogen and it generates electricity and heat. So you can do combined heat and power. And a lot of the welfare side of things is all about heating water and space heating, and again you talked about drying rooms. So we have a solution where you can put it down on the construction site. We organise the hydrogen logistics to fuel the hydrogen power unit, and then it generates electricity in the normal way. And the standard 20-foot container will generate around 250 kilowatts of power.
And this is actually happening now.
This is a product we make today. We've done a number of construction sites already for some quite significant customers, and in fact I think we have an agreement with Balfour Beatty to deploy one of the hydrogen power units up on the A63 project. Again, we heard about that this morning as well. So it's a practical and viable alternative to delivering energy and power in the kind of quantities we're used to with fossil fuels, but in a carbon-free way.
And is it cost effective?
We're working very hard. So
That's the trade-off.
well, this is
It's
important that you talk about the challenges and you have honest conversations about where we are today. Right now, it's a little bit more expensive. And that's for a number of reasons.
But are people prepared to pay a bit more?
Well, this is, again,
are we there yet?
This is the change, and it's been quite a recent change. And again, you mentioned it in your presentation that unless you have a credible net zero plan, you're not in the game. And that really makes a difference, because then it doesn't matter how much cheaper the carbonising alternative is, because it's just not an option. Coming back to hydrogen, how much it costs, again, the challenge really is economies of scale. So if you think about the infrastructure around fossil fuels, it's been developed over decades, billions and billions and billions have got into it. It's ubiquitous and it's everywhere. And really with hydrogen, we're starting afresh. So the amount of hydrogen we produce, it's comparable to fossil fuels, but we're not quite down there yet. The hydrogen power units are more expensive than a diesel generator, but when we first rolled out diesel generators, I expect they cost a lot more than they do today. So the prices are coming down. Just to put some figures on it, we price the hydrogen fuel in terms of litre equivalent of diesel. So it's the same amount of energy you'd get out of a litre of diesel, and it works out at about 232, 236 at the moment, a litre, compared with diesel, which is running around, I drove past a filling station on the way here, 195, £2, something like that. So we're working hard to bring it down. And as the infrastructure is rolled out and the quantities that hydrogen is produced in, then prices will come down.
Yeah, so it's an investment for the future as well, isn't it? It's kind of future-proofing.
Yeah, and we're finding that we've deployed it successfully on construction sites. The other important thing to say is that the fuel cells are very efficient, so 50% efficiency, whereas a diesel engine would typically run at somewhere between 20 and 30% efficient. What we have done on construction sites before is combined heat and power, so a lot of the welfare energy demand is for heating, space and water heating, drying rooms, water for washing, that kind of thing. The fuel cells run about 60 to 70 degrees C, so that's perfect for space and water heating. And if we can't use that heat, we have to throw it away, because you can't help but generate that heat when you make the electricity. But if we can use that heat and plumb it in, literally, for like a central heating system and a water tank, then your efficiencies go right up. You're 80% efficient then, and that also helps bring the cost down. So it's this, again, what you were talking about before lunch, about having the conversation and looking at the cost, but also looking about the other ways that we can use energy more efficiently, other wins that we can get for deploying the technology in the right way on the construction site.
And also, it's, as we said, it's about clients' expectations now. They have changed, haven't they? It's not just the race to the bottom, who can do the cheapest, but it's also about ticking that environmental box. Well, not that it's a box ticking, that makes it sound trite, but making sure that that is a consideration. And let's speak now to Stephen. What are your expectations?
So I think our expectations are that we will continue to have to connect the country. So the strategic road network is currently the way that our goods get around, our families get together, we go on holiday, and our purpose will remain the same. I think part of the future sustainable transport system is
in terms of zero carbon.
I think what is changing is how we connect the country is going to change, and how we do it environmentally sustainably is becoming ever more important for our license to invest and enhance the network. So if we cannot credibly say that what we are doing is sustainable, we won't have the investment in the network, we won't have the jobs in the construction industry that follow. So we do need to deliver net zero. We published our net zero plan last July, and it set out 3 headline targets. So we will put our own corporate emissions to net zero by 2030. We will get to net zero construction and maintenance emissions by 2040, and we will reduce road user emissions to net zero by 2050.
Are those ambitious?
They are ambitious.
Are they achievable?
I think they're achievable. For the corporate emissions, something like 85% of our footprint is electricity use. Something like 75% of that is lighting the network. So moving to more efficient lighting, using renewable electricity, we can go a long way in reducing our own corporate carbon footprint. We're going to plant 3 million trees. We manage an area of land that is the size of the Isle of Wight. So we've got a potential to deliver lots of environmental value from our land. We'll slim down our office estate. We'll move our traffic officer vehicles to electric. So I can see a pathway to the 2030 target. 2050 target, the only option of getting there is everything moving to ultra-low emission vehicles, and that means electrification of cars and vans.
They need to come down in price a bit though, don't they, for them to be taken on more widely, do you think?
So my background as an economist, I kind of look at the way the cost curve for batteries has evolved over the last 20 years. They've reduced in price something like 97% per kilowatt hour of storage. Projections will be cost the same as a combustion engine vehicle by the middle of this decade. I'm pretty optimistic that we'll find for cars and vans it's quite easy for the economics to support the transition. Yeah. The bigger stuff, HGVs, there is a question, what role for hydrogen, what role for electric? We'll play our parts supporting the charging infrastructure, supporting the trials for the different technologies. But I can see a pathway there again. The one that is the most challenging, without any question for me, is the construction and maintenance emissions. And I can't tell you exactly how we're going to get there. But there's 3 big sources. It's the plant we talked about, it's the haulage and all the transport of people and goods, and then it's the materials and all the emissions that are embedded within those materials. And it's going to need creativity, a willingness to try, learn, adapt across the industry. But also, I really like the point that Joe made earlier about not seeing this as too much of a competition. So the industry around safety came together and said, if we find something that works for safety, we'll share it. Because people's well-being, avoiding harm is too important to make a commercial advantage from. Carbon needs to be seen a little bit as the same emergency for this industry. If we cannot drive carbon out of our construction, there won't be as much investment, there won't be as many jobs.
Indeed. Nikki, let's turn to you now. So in terms of innovation in this area, what does the aggregate industries bring?
It's been a really exciting time for us because we've recently announced our sustainability strategy of how we're going to achieve all of these targets that have been put on us by legislation and everything else. But we've been working very closely with the likes of Balfour Beatty, National Highways, and also our peers within the industry as well to really understand what that starting point looks like. Where are those carbon hotspots? What are the issues? Because unfortunately, I think everyone will agree, there isn't a magic switch for us to flick and we will automatically be net zero. Unfortunately, we're not in that situation. So it's really looking at all of our product offerings, all of the materials across ready-mix, aggregates, asphalts, and looking at those smaller wins. So hopefully, eventually, those smaller wins will soon start to add up and make a real difference.
That's what you said, isn't it? It's the little things make a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Watch the pennies and the pounds will take care of themselves, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. The little things really do matter, and at the moment, I think we are overlooking them to our detriment because we are trying to compete on a subject that we really shouldn't be competing on at all.
Yeah. So you're making those small changes in the hope that...
We are. And going back to what you've just mentioned about not being in competition, a great example of that is how aggregate industries have partnered up with Tarmac for the delivery of the Lower Thames Crossing project. So we have the Sustain Alliance, and it's all about doing the right thing for the project, looking at the lowest carbon option and lowest carbon delivery because it's the right thing for the project. it's what the client wants. So as industry partners, we've come together and we're bringing all that wealth of knowledge and experience we have as material manufacturers and putting that back into the project, which is the right thing to do. So we've spent a long time really understanding our baseline data as well, because there isn't a standard approach across the industry of measuring carbon and carbon baselines, carbon factors. So we've done an incredible amount of work really understanding where that starting point is for us and ensuring that we have the right tools, digital tools in place to be able to report accurate information back to key customers. So we're comparing apples and apples. We're not all using different calculations, different ways of doing things. It's a consistent approach. And one of the ways we've been doing that is our parent company, Holcim, have been working with IBM to develop a digital solution specific to highways. So it's really looking at the optimized design solution for roads. So it really focuses in on that material side of things, so local resourcing, circular economy, so looking at what materials we can reuse within a project, what opportunities are there, what can we reuse back into the project, so it never has to leave the site footprint. It stays within that site footprint and really takes the emphasis away of using natural resources and things like that.
And presumably that conformity, that uniformity and the digital deliverance helps with greenwashing and
absolutely
making sure that people are doing what they say they're doing,
yes.
And here's the paper trail so we can prove it.
Absolutely, and Oris is a great tool for that as well. So as our partnership with Sustain, both Tarmac and AI data has gone into this system to look at the lowest carbon solution, material sourcing solution for LTC. So we're not competing with each other. It's again, it goes back, we're doing the right thing for the project and ensuring that we really are making those significant small changes to have that big impact.
Indeed. Nikki, thank you. Nick Rothwell, let's turn to you, waiting very patiently at the end. Thank you so much. From your perspective, what do you think the key factors are for us all to work towards this net zero carbon future?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So my focus is from the design point of view, working for Atkins, and considering sort of whole life carbon throughout the delivery of projects, right from the earliest stages through to delivery. And that's where we sort of collaborate with the likes of Balfour Beatty and aggregate industries and our clients to really collaborate on decision making. And I think it's decision making for me is one of the key elements to getting to that net zero future. So integrating carbon into the way that we make decisions from the earliest stages and right through, and the kind of way that changes through our project delivery process. So at the very earliest stages, we're making much higher level decisions. So big decisions like, do we build this bridge or that bridge, and what's it going to be built out of? And can we avoid building it altogether? And that sort of do nothing conversation from the sort of PAS 2080 carbon reduction hierarchy is the sorts of conversations we need to be having at those really early stages. And then that carries right through. And as we sort of work with different partners, as we move into later project stages, it's less about build nothing. We know we've got to build something, so can we build less? So considering, can we make this asset smaller? Can we use less materials? And then we start to think, okay, this is what we're going to build, but what can we build it out of? Can we use sort of lowest carbon products? And that's where we collaborate with our supply chain to understand what's available and what are the latest solutions, and sort of designing them in from the earliest stages, but also discussing with our contractors how are we going to build it and how can we build it as efficiently as possible, and sort of designing that in from the earliest stages. And if we do that early and we collaborate and we integrate carbon into those decisions, I think we've got a really good chance of getting to a really low carbon solution.
Now, question for all of you. I'm going to have a quick fire, quick answer from all of you. What is the single biggest contribution individuals can make towards net zero carbon? Go.
In our projects, I think it's for individuals, it's about considering carbon at every stage. So, and that's it, everybody has a role in considering carbon, whether you're a designer and you're making a decision between this material or that material, or whether you're a contractor considering what plant to use. It's just that knowledge that you have an impact and making sure that you are considering within your area of influence how you can make an impact on carbon.
Nikki?
I think it has to be making data-driven decisions. Don't just keep doing the same thing that you've done on past projects and what you think is the right thing. Actually get the data and drill down into the data to make sure that the decisions you're making are the right decisions.
Indeed. Stephen?
I think in my job the biggest is getting this into our next 5-year investment plan. So all of the thinking, all the investment planning considers the environment and our ambition in that space.
I think I just encourage everyone to engage meaningfully with the net zero programs within their business. You know, as an individual, it's really hard to make a meaningful difference to carbon emissions. If you think about the things you use, you know, your car and your heating are probably ones to consider. But when you're in a company, particularly one on the scale of Balfour Beatty, that is clearly committed to net zero, engaging meaningfully in that, you know, allows you all to pool those resources, and then you really can shift the dial.
That's good advice. Jo?
I'm going to answer this from the very individual perspective.
Yeah, please do.
Which, you know, so everybody in their day-to-day lives, think about where we're spending our hard-earned money, because our money is our voting power. So when we go to the supermarket and you go to reach the packet of bananas, think about whether you need the packet that's wrapped in plastic or the broccoli that's wrapped in plastic, or you can take the loose item. When you've got an item of clothing that gets a hole in it, go fix it. Don't go buy another item of clothing. Think about where we are spending our voting power. And if we start to do those little changes at home, we will then bring that into the workplace. We will bring that sustainable mindset to the workplace. You know, when we finish our shampoo bottle, recycle it. Don't just put it in the bathroom bin and forget about it. These little steps make a big difference. You know, batch cook meals, freeze meals, don't waste food. Little things like this make a massive difference.
It's just getting it into the psyche, isn't it?
Get it into the
Every
psyche,
day.
and then you'll come to work, and you know, and you'll, you know, you won't litter, and you'll actually, you know, we'll use the recycling bins available at work correctly, and we'll think about, oh, you know,
refill your water bottle.
Refill your water
all that
bottle.
stuff.
You know, little things like that start to make a big difference. It's the mindset that we have to build from the ground up.
I feel like we're getting there. I feel like we've made progress from a few years ago. Do you agree?
I definitely think we're getting there, and actually a good example
I mean,
of
I don't mean we're getting to net zero, but I mean we're getting the mindset that is becoming more the norm.
I think people are willing to have the conversation now, and I think people are willing to look at their own lives and think, how can I make a small change that will add up to make a big difference? I think they're willing to have that conversation now, yeah.
Definitely. Well, we're going to throw it open to you now. There's another poll. So please do vote for this one. Have you made any changes to your lifestyle to help prevent climate change? Well, that's quite a big question. So the options are, as you can see on your screen, no doubt, many changes, a few changes, or no changes at all. And we will get the results of that poll from Megan. Do you have them in?
The results are coming in thick and fast, but at the moment, the majority of people are saying that they have made a few changes. But there are some votes now coming in for many changes. So, I mean, they both outweigh the no changes at all.
Okay, so that's encouraging. That's encouraging, isn't it?
It's continuing to grow, but yeah, the majority of people are saying a few changes they've made there.
A few changes. Okay, well, let's see if we can make a few more changes after today. Any questions for our panel, Megan?
Sure. So we've had one question here that asks, what's the difference between zero carbon and net zero carbon? Oh,
that's a good question. Who would like to take that? You're looking a bit reluctant.
I'll have a go.
Go on.
So net zero is when, on balance, you've got zero carbon emissions. And the reason people talk about net zero is that some processes are really difficult to completely pull the carbon emissions out of. So cement, for example, the way cement is made at the moment, inherent in the process of carbon emissions. So we need to have other processes that have negative carbon emissions to balance those out, because we're going to want to still build stuff. You know, cement is still a useful thing. So that's you know, true zero is there's no carbon emitted in the process. Net zero is where you then allow for things that do emit carbon by having other stuff that offsets that.
That compensates. And how does the compensation bit happen?
Well, there's lots of ways that people talk about that, and that's actually one of your point about having conversations around. This is where it's an area ripe for greenwashing, where you have the the offsetting side of things. But there are certainly things that you can do, like so planting trees and bogs and so on for the sort of the carbon sinks. People talk about direct air capture. That's starting to come, but there's still a lot of research and development that needs to come before that can actually sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere. It's one of the more challenging areas.
There's a lot of awareness raising that we need to do around offsetting, because we can't rely on it to solve the problem. So planting trees and peat bogs is excellent, predominantly from a biodiversity perspective and creating a space for nature. But in terms of sucking carbon out of the atmosphere, they're really inefficient. The minute you plant a tree, you've got to wait 15 years before you can actually start to account for the carbon. And Oxfam released a really fascinating report whereby they started to pick this apart to say to organisations, this cannot be the only solution that you work on. It's part, but it can't be all of it. Because to put it in context, if every developing nation that has committed to a net zero target today were to meet their offsetting requirements that they've stated, we would have to plant up a forest the size of the Indian continent and all agricultural land available on our planet today, just for the developing nations that have committed, which is
that's not practical then.
So it's, for me, the offsetting initiatives that organisations are doing has a far more impactful role to play in the biodiversity argument and the fact that we have depreciated our biodiversity, our natural environment and our biosphere to such a point that we need to build it back up. So I think they're future-proofing against a big trend that's coming up after carbon. But for carbon itself, we need to make those real reductions.
So how do you offset carbon then, if planting trees isn't good enough?
This is the big debate. The IPCC did specifically reference carbon sequestering, which is where we suck carbon out of the atmosphere. There is a debate at the moment about, does that make it worse? Is it the right thing to do? My personal perspective, and it's only personal, is I don't see how we're going to get out of this mess without having mechanical sequestration. We've got facilities that exist already that we're trialling at the moment, not Balfour specifically, but other energy organisations. That's just my personal opinion on it, though. That I think we're going to have to look at the mechanical solutions. But I throw it open. You guys might completely disagree.
Stephen?
One of the terminology conversations you have is carbon neutral as opposed to net zero. And the big difference with net zero is you need to reduce your actual emissions by at least 90%. In our case, and you're only offsetting the very hard to reduce residual. Whereas you can claim to be carbon neutral and be offsetting the vast majority of your emissions.
Right.
So I think the commitment to net zero says we are going to work really hard to actually reduce our emissions. So it reduces
carbon neutral does feel like a bit of a fertile ground for greenwashing, doesn't it? We're carbon neutral. Well, what does that actually mean? So
you can pick up a lot of products today, and if you look at the back, it says carbon neutral. The reality is that means nothing. And this is where institutes and like the Science-Based Targets Initiative are so critical for validating, that a company is actually making those real reductions. And as you quite rightly say, that 90% leap. If you can do that 90%, then you can start to have a sensible conversation around offsetting solutions.
Yes.
But if you're immediately going, oh, don't worry, we'll just keep producing as much carbon as before, but we'll plant a tree over here, it's never going to work.
And is Balfour Beatty able to get to that 90% in your view?
Absolutely, we're going to have to. There is, do we want to have a successful, prosperous business with happy, prosperous people, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now? Yes. That means we have to achieve it. It's as simple as that.
And I would say that the technology with which you will achieve that exists today.
Yes.
We don't have to invent this stuff. We talked about hydrogen and fuel cells, and they took fuel cells on the Apollo missions to the moon. I mean, they're not a new technology.
Yeah.
It's that we now see the need to pull the carbon out of our energy systems, which is driving us to adopt these technologies and deploy them in ways that previously we haven't done. And it's that adoption and rollout at scale that will get us to achieving that. And the scale is really important. I mean, I'd just like to pick up on, we've talked about doing the little things, and they're really important, particularly with the importance of attitudes. I started by saying we need to do the big stuff too. And just on an individual level, the things that probably emit the most carbon that we all do are drive cars, unless you've got an electric car, and heat your home. And they, transport and heating, they're not going anywhere. We're still going to need to heat our homes. We're still going to want to transport, drive ourselves around.
But there are ways of making both of those things more efficient, aren't there?
There are ways of making them more efficient, which is part of the solution, but we need to actually remove the carbon emissions from those processes as well if you're to achieve net zero. And this is what I mean by doing the big things too. So transportation, heat, plant equipment, welfare cabins, decarbonising those are a requirement to achieve net zero as well.
But as you said, Joe, it starts with attitudes, and hopefully we've explored that today. Hopefully we've changed some attitudes. Thank you very much for joining us. Our fantastic panel, Nick Rothwell from Atkins, Nikki Richardson from Aggregate Industries, Andrew Cunningham, sorry, not Andrew Cunningham. Andrew Cunningham was replaced by Dr. Ian Wilkinson. Thank you so much for joining us at the last minute. And Stephen Elderkin from National Highways, and of course, Joe Gilroy, who's the Group Director of Sustainability here at Balfour Beatty. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sending in your questions, and thank you for answering our poll.